So let me begin by introducing our celebrity guest speaker today, who's Anne-Marie Knott. Anne-Marie is the Robert and Barbara Frick Professor in Business at Washington University's Olin Business School. She previously served on the faculty at Wharton, earned her doctorate at UCLA, working under Dick Rumelt and Bill McKelvey, and has been a special issue co-editor for SMJ, as well as a longstanding member of SMJ's editorial board. As you can see, I am today broadcasting from the global headquarters of SNN, the Strategy News Network, because I wanted to let Anne-Marie feel at home because she has so much interaction with the media. She is a columnist at Forbes and has done some work with CNBC and Wall Street Journal. So figured we'd make her feel at home by having the Studio 2 background here. She studies innovation, including large-scale R&D and entrepreneurship, which she views as complements. She's developed a measure of R&D effectiveness called the Research Quotient, or RQ, which again was used for CNBC in the ranking of their R&D All-Stars. Anne-Marie founded her firm AMK Analytics to help firms identify their optimal R&D investment and improve their R&D productivity. She began her career as an engineer / project manager in defense electronics at Hughes Aircraft Corporation. So let's please join me in welcoming Anne-Marie Knott. Okay. Let's see, Anne-Marie, you're muted, so we got.
I just saw that. Yes, thank you, Rich. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, right. So we don't get to hear the clapping because of needing to mute most people, but let me unshare the screen. Good. Okay. So thanks very much for joining us, Anne-Marie. I really appreciate it, and really glad that you could be part of this series of virtual campus visits. So, I like to start off these interviews by saying, and I'm sure my colleagues are tired of me hearing me say this, but it never gets old, to me at least, that I've never yet heard a 10-year-old say, "Mommy, I really want to be a strategy professor when I grow up." That is a line that has never been spoken in the history of the world. And so I figure that most of us have kind of an indirect pathway that gets us into this career. And so I was going to invite you to tell us a little bit about what that pathway was for you, because I know that it was, at least for you, somewhat indirect, you having been an actual rocket scientist. So maybe tell us a little bit about what led you to this crazy career we call strategy professor. What's a nice engineer like you doing in a field like this?
Yeah, so I was working at Hughes. I went back and got my MBA because I wanted to run a program. And I loved it. I remember having tears in my eyes when the program ended. And so I decided to go back and get my PhD. So I did get to run a program. That was exciting. I decided to go back and get my PhD because a lot of my colleagues had PhDs in science and engineering, and they were teaching at UCLA or USC at night. So that was my goal. I was going to teach at USC or UCLA at night. So I continued to work at Hughes. And what ended up happening is our company got bought by General Motors, and they moved my group to Tucson, and I said, "Academia, here I come." Yeah.
So that convinced you to join a PhD program, I guess?
No, I was already in the PhD program.
Okay.
Yeah. So the thought so I was working on doing the PhD, thinking I would just teach at night. And but when they moved us, so that was like 3 years in, and so then I just became an academic full time.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad you made that decision. We've all benefited from it greatly.
Why, thank you.
So Why strategy though? Why did you pick strategy as the field to go into?
Oh, that was easy. When I did the MBA, I did a self-designed strategy major. They didn't actually have one, but I took marketing strategy, ops strategy. Yeah, I was inside firms, right? Decision-making strategy is about decision-making, right? So,
Okay, so that's what attracted you to the field, is the focus on decision making?
yeah.
Yeah, and I can imagine that given your experience as a program manager, that would be important. Was there something else about your experience at Hughes or anywhere else that made strategy important to you?
Oh, everything I was doing at the company was kind of strategic, right? So they would call me in after I did the MBA. They would call me in to solve different kinds of problems. They were always strategic problems. And one that was fun. Well, this would go on for become a very long story, but the government changed the way that they were doing acquisition. They were going to do something called second sourcing. So previously what you would do is you would have a development contract, and then you would have the rights for all the production. And they decided that they were spending too much money. So they were going to give your drawings to another company. And the way they would decide who got to build how many was somebody's dissertation. And so they asked me to come up with the initial bid. How fun is that, right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I remember seeing I guess this is probably related. I remember seeing a show about the shootout, the design shootout for I think it was for the F-22 between Boeing and Lockheed, I guess at the time.
Yeah.
And I can't remember which side won and which side lost. I think Boeing lost that one, right?
I don't remember. Yeah.
But I remember the documentary saying that they got the consolation prize of being able to build a certain number of them or something.
Yeah. Yes, because previously you would win that competition, the shootout, and then you'd get to produce from then on.
Interesting.
But the satisfying thing is they got the bulk of the buy, which I was upset about, but we can go into that another time. But when they shot the missiles, they died as soon as they hit the launch pulse. So it's one thing to get somebody's drawing, it's actually another thing to be able to figure out why the drawings are doing what they're doing.
Right, and how to actually manufacture it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. So yeah, I noticed, I had never noticed this before, but you earned your bachelor's in mathematics at Utah.
Yeah.
Has that informed anything that you've done?
That got me my job. But yeah, I mean, you know my stuff. My stuff's pretty mathematical. You'll see it when we.
Yeah, true.
You'll see it when we get to the talk.
True. Okay.
Yeah, and some people have actually characterized what I did as knowledge physics, right?
Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the process that you went through to find a topic for your dissertation. What was that like?
Obviously, PhD students will like this story, and I've told it to others. But so I failed my major field exam, which meant that you got to sit in a room with all your committee, right? So this is Dick Rummelt, Richard Makadok now, Bill McKelvey, Marvin Lieberman, and Steve Postrel. And, they give me the news first off. And, you're just so embarrassed, humiliated, everything. And they're saying, well, we don't think you're quite cooked yet. What does that mean? And they said, well, we actually can't figure out what you're interested in. And I said, well, I want to build a model where the government, I think the problem is the government doesn't understand how firms behave. So I want to build a model so that when the government makes their decisions about, how to do things, that they accurately capture what firms will do. And Dick Rummelt says, well, Anne-Marie, when I was at JPL, we all wanted to build a model of the world. But in the end, all you have is a model of the world. Okay, not that. So that was the non-answer to your question. The answer to your question is that, the resource-based view was big at the time, right? And, one of the main tenets of it is that the valuable resource has to be inimitable. and I was sitting, I'd gone to an academy of management. I was sitting at the airport in the food court, and I'm looking around at all these franchises, and I said, wait a second. I said, what's valuable in the franchise is a routine, right? It clearly isn't inimitable, or you wouldn't be able to create a franchise.
Right.
So what is it that's sustaining the value? And then I told that to the same committee, and then their eyes each lit up. So then I went, oh, okay, now I've got a topic.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, that's an interesting story. Yeah, and the usual question I ask as a follow-up, I'm not sure it applies in this case, right? Because usually I ask, well, my doctoral students sometimes have an easy time finding a dissertation topic, but have a difficult time narrowing it down to a specific research question.
Yeah.
And so I usually ask, how did you go through that process of narrowing down the topic to a question? But it sounds like the question popped in maybe even before the topic.
Yeah. So I'm all of my stuff is seeing some disconnect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that always is a question. So the disconnect is either between two theories, between theory and empirics, or between two set of empirics.
Right. Okay.
Basically, I say something's not right here.
Right. Yeah, that is the common theme. So, okay. So, what were the challenges that you faced in doing your dissertation? I'm sure my current dissertation students want to hear about this. What were the biggest challenges? Was it conceptual, or data, or analysis, or writing, framing? What did you?
It seems easy now, right? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. As a first-time researcher, what were you struggling with?
Well, the question was easy, right? And I'd worked in industry, so my first step whenever I write a paper is to do the PowerPoints, right? To tell the whole story, right?
Uh-huh.
Once
so
you get
framing comes naturally to you.
Yeah, framing comes naturally to me. And I also teach this in MBA classes too, is that start by the diagram or the chart or the table that you expect to get if everything works out, and then work backwards from that. So that was straightforward. The first paper, so the dissertation was called Do Managers Matter? And when I describe it to you, you'll see that it's going to seem really familiar to something else you've seen with the exact same title. So what I wanted to do, what I did was I was comparing franchisees to independents.
Right.
And in order to do that, I had to see how their routines differed, right? So I went through the whole, it was a lot of work, which is your dissertation should be, but I had operations manuals for the franchisees and went through them, 500-page manuals to try to characterize what I thought were the essential elements of the routine. And created a survey of that,
Mm-hmm.
distributed to franchisees and independents, and saw, so the first question is, do you follow this routine? No, are you aware of it? Do you follow it? And do you think it's valuable? So actually the last two are reversed. And then what I did from that, I also collected financial data. So I built their production function. And I measured the distance to the frontier, which would now be called the TFP. Mm-hmm. And I related the TFP to the differences in their practices. So we could actually,
This was the quick printing paper?
Yeah, well, there ended up being three. Hold on just one second.
Just 1 second. How do you want to fly? Just like the chip?
I'm sorry? Yes.
How do you want? Just like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Do we get a vote?
Yeah, so the big thing, so the two things were going through all those manuals, right? And then this was back in the day where surveys were mailed. Right? So, the printing it, the mailing it, the waiting to see if anybody sends it back, all that stuff.
Postage, everything. Looking at envelopes, yes.
Yeah.
So, what led you to that particular industry, that particular franchise?
My dad had when I was in senior in high school, he bought a quick printing thing. So so I knew that industry. Worked in his shop many, many days.
Okay, and was he a franchisee or was he an independent?
No, he was independent. He bought an existing thing. He
Mhm.
walked in, he was looking for a job, was going to get his resume printed, went into what was called, instant printing.
Right.
He said, I want to get copies of my resume. And they said, well, it'll be like 3 days. He said, it's called instant. He said, so there's definitely opportunity here.
Yes, indeed. So, how did, just out of curiosity then, if he was not a franchisee, where did he get his routines from?
Well, he just bought the company.
Okay.
It's kind of like what's the pizza franchise? Domino's. So that's the one in Michigan. So what the guys did was they bought a pizza place in Michigan, and it wasn't doing very well. But in the process of figuring out why it doesn't do very well, then you get a really nice sense of how to redesign the routine. You don't really learn much if it's already working well.
Right. Okay. So did he? But in your father's case, it was working well, I guess.
No. When he bought it, it was just okay. Remember, because they told him it was going to be 3 days to get his.
Oh, okay. So he made an impact on the routines there.
Yeah. He was an engineer. That's where I got it from.
Ah, okay. Well, this is interesting.
Oh, good.
I'm learning more about this because honestly, that really is one of my favorite papers in the whole field. Is that the factor market routines paradox paper. I'm sure I'm getting those words. I'm getting those words jumbled up there,
No,
but
that's good.
they're all in the title of the paper somewhere, and I assign that paper every time I teach a doctoral
Thank you.
seminar. It's a terrific paper, and I do like. There's so much to like about it. The meticulousness of the data collection, the care, the detailed, grounded understanding of the industry setting, and just the incredible counterintuitiveness of the results. It's beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful piece of work.
That's so sweet. Thank you.
And so I looked it up this morning, and it is actually your best cited paper
Is it?
To Google Scholar. Yeah.
I'm not very highly cited.
Well, it's up there in the I don't know, maybe about 300 citations or something like that. But it deserves to be, however many times it's cited, it deserves to be cited more because it's an excellent paper, and I recommend it to all my students. So what happened next? How did you get from that project to your research stream? How did you develop a research stream out of that project?
Oh, well,
Or
there was a
moving away
second,
from it?
yeah, so the paper we just talked about is the first paper. So the second paper was the one where I look at what happens after somebody leaves the franchise, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of, I wanted it to be the dynamic value of management, but organization said it wasn't the dynamic value of management. They made me change the title.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but the idea for that came from, so I was claiming that I had found how, that managers matter. And then the idea came from, no, I know it did. I was at the Academy or SMS talking to Dartmouth, Connie's colleague.
Margie,
yeah. And Margie said something about, something about the dynamic. And then the idea occurred to me that I could look at what happens after they leave, right? Do you know that paper?
It's been a while. So remind us.
So it was cool. Usually you can't leave a franchise, but there was some kind of lawsuit. And everybody who's in a franchise, it seems as though they get in principally to learn the routine, and then afterwards they think that they can get by without the franchisor.
Yeah, right.
And so what ends up, what I was able to see was that, and then if they do, then, they capture all the royalties that they were paying the franchisor.
Yes.
But what ends up happening, and that reinforces the idea in the first paper, is that over time their routine decays to what the independence routine is. They don't capture that anymore. So
right, because they're no longer under the discipline.
That's right. Yeah.
of the
No,
franchisor.
absolutely right. So I have to thank Margie for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, and so that paper, I think, reinforces the first paper, which, basically comes to the conclusion that, hey, it's not so much the knowledge, it's the discipline.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was, that was fun, right?
And actually, I have an idea about
discipline's not that big in our field, right?
Pardon?
Discipline's not that big in our field.
No, you're right. Yeah, we could have a discipline-based view of the firm.
Yeah, I mean, that is what managed in principle.
Yeah. So actually, what I was thinking the other day, I was actually thinking about this paper of yours, and it occurred to me that, maybe these results are the outcome of a separating equilibrium in some sense, right? Right? There's a separating equilibrium that separates out the independents from the franchisees on the basis of maybe who's more amenable to following instructions.
Yeah.
That's
right.
If I have a kind of a lower either psychological cost or maybe even material cost for financial cost for following instructions, greater willingness to follow instructions, then I'll separate out into the the franchisee category as opposed to the independent category.
Right.
And so that in some sense a franchise agreement serves a similar function to an insurance deductible. Right?
Okay, say more.
Similar, right? Because that's what the purpose of the insurance deductible is, to separate out the good risks from the bad risks.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we should talk more about this. Right?
Yeah, I think that might be an interesting paper to write there.
Right. No, there is there's another thought in the back of my mind on this too that has to do with the franchisor exploiting overconfidence on the part of the.
Well, but if the entrepreneur is overconfident, wouldn't they want to be more of an independent?
Yeah. So I need to think more about it.
So actually, and that may be a benefit to the franchisor as well, is that it screens out the overconfident entrepreneurs.
Right. The ones that are amenable, which gets back to your separate.
Yeah, the ones who think they know it all already.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's something to be said there about maybe the profits of. Right, because if we take seriously, your result that in effect the extra value creation for a franchisee is due to the discipline of the franchisor, then some portion of that extra profit, extra value, is being captured by the franchisor. So
royalties.
They're being paid in effect to be a disciplinarian, and there's a paper there, I'm sure. Haven't quite put my finger on what it is, but I think there's an interesting theory paper there.
Now, see if we were able to have those one-on-one discussions.
Well, you have my phone number, so
that's true. That's true.
We can do that offline.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do it as part of the seminar.
Yeah. So okay, so that led you to the second paper, but you've taken that and blown it up into a much larger stream of research on these topics of R&D and entrepreneurship, and so tell us a little bit about how you've developed a more of a long-term research program that got you past those initial studies.
So remember that my real interests. So once you get the dissertation out of the way. Then you can go back to what you care about, right?
Exactly.
Right. And so what I really cared about was, this stuff inside Hughes, right? Which was, and I'll tell the story when I talk about the paper, but when General Motors bought us, they started changing things. I'm going, oh, this is stupid. This is the C students telling the A students how to do the R&D. This is going to permanently degrade our R&D capability. But nobody, you couldn't communicate that to anybody. Nobody else was concerned like I was, because there wasn't a measure of R&D capability.
Mm.
So that'll motivate the talk today. So that was kind of my holy grail. The first paper, so the paper that kicks that off is, so well, there'd be multiple steps. So one step is Rebecca Henderson was, when I was a PhD student, was presenting that paper with Kim Clark, right?
Okay.
No, the one with,
Coburn?
yeah, Coburn, the flexible managerial integration processes.
Okay.
Yeah. And they were looking inside pharma firms. And I said, well, why would you use a firm fixed effect to capture this? I said, why wouldn't you use the exponent on R&D? And she said, there weren't enough degrees of freedom, but the intuition for the measure that I ultimately used came that early. And honestly, well, it came when I was in Hughes, honestly. What was I? Oh, anyway, so I had that in the back of my mind, but I wasn't going to do anything with it head on. And then, I'd always liked that absorptive capacity paper. Oh, there's actually two papers, right?
Right.
And,
there's the ASQ version, and I think the Economic Journal version.
Yeah. So the empirical result that goes along with that is that so the basic story is that the more you spend on R&D, the more you benefit from spillovers, right?
Right.
Okay, and I just said, at first I just love that idea. Everybody, the notion of absorptive capacity is really powerful because you can't learn calculus until you know algebra, right?
Right.
But it occurred to me that result can't be right, that it can't be the case that spending more on R&D gets you more benefit from spillovers, because the people who spend the most on R&D are at the frontier, and the people, and so everybody else is inferior to them. So
Right.
Then it occurred to me that was just an empirical artifact, that what was happening is that firms must differ in their R&D capability, which I knew from industry. I mean, I told you I knew who the A students were and the C students were.
Right.
And that what's happening is that the artifact, this interaction term being significant, was due to the fact that we hadn't accounted for differences in companies' R&D capability, and that once you did that, then you would find that the interactive term becomes insignificant, which is that paper.
Okay, so basically RQ kills AC.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah. And then after I'd written that paper, I went, oh my God, the thing that I just used as the control is actually this holy grail that I'd been after.
So tell us a little bit more about what you've done with that then. You've gotten this holy grail.
Yeah, so again, the paper will be related to this. So the first thing that I did was, I had all this all CompuStat data going back as many years as you have financial data. So I had it going back to 72 for all publicly traded firms, the measure. And so I plotted it and discovered that it had declined 65%. And so basically since then I spend all my time trying to figure out why. Because, innovation is the engine of economic growth, and we'll talk about that in the paper. So if we can restore companies' R&D productivity, we ought to be able to revive economic
Right.
growth.
And I'm guessing that leads into your interest in entrepreneurship, because you're not going to capture that piece of research capability if you're looking at publicly traded firms. You're going to be missing the whole piece of research capability that exists among the non-publicly traded firms.
Yeah, no, that would make sense. No, the interest in entrepreneurs. So the entrepreneurship thing came because the franchisees and the independents were entrepreneurs, right? So when I was on the market, I was thinking of myself as a strategy person. And when I gave the talk at Wharton, the entrepreneurship folks said, would you be interested in a job in entrepreneurship? Because they said, that's entrepreneurship. I went, oh, okay. And so once you start teaching stuff, then you end up doing some research. But yeah, I think of the two as complementary.
Well, do you think that 70% decline in RQ is due in part to the shift of R&D to startups in some sense, or no? Okay.
No. There's actually been, so I've got lots of things in my head, but it turns out the source of most internet companies will be different, right? Because, there were lots of things you didn't need to start those, but most tech companies are founded by people who work inside another tech company, right?
Right.
And they had a project that they were working on. The firm that they were working for just cancels it because it either doesn't fit what the firm does, or it doesn't fit, it doesn't have a scale adequate to make it worthwhile business for them to be going into.
Right.
And so the number of startups has declined over time. I don't know if you know that. And I think the reason the startups have declined is because, if the large firms are less productive, then they're generating fewer founders.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. Yeah. So is it that, well, you'll probably tell us later in the paper, but I was going to just speculate, is it that the research capabilities left the country, or is it
Nope.
Nope.
Happening around the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so, okay. So given that this is your topic of, research capability, right? What do you think is the most unimportant, the most important, I got my two words reversed. I was going to ask the most important unanswered question, not the most unimportant. What do you think is the most, what do you think are the most important unanswered questions about R&D capability at this point in the development of the field? What don't we know about R&D capability that we really ought to know?
Well, those are the things I would be working on, right?
Well, presumably not alone.
Pardon?
Presumably not alone, right? There may be more to it than just what
No,
you're
but I mean, the ones that I can identify, I'm kind of working on. So, I'll tell you the things that I'm working on, right? So, I'm working with Natalia at Wharton on something that everybody believes might contribute to the decline, which is the fact that central labs have closed. There's all anecdotal evidence that they've closed. So we want to actually do a census to find out whether that's true, and then find out why, and then assess what the impact is.
Okay.
So that's one.
Okay, cool. Any other things that you think are going to be important upcoming research topics?
Well, the other one that I was alluded to when we were talking about the startups is, can you show, so they call this declining dynamism, right?
Mm-hmm.
The lower rate of foundings. Yeah, so I think looking into that would be important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So these different types of historical trends that you're seeing are what interest you. Okay.
Yeah.
Looking at the long-term trends in R&D. Nice. Okay. Okay. So let's see. Give us the benefit of your wisdom. What lessons have you learned about doing research that my doctoral students and junior colleagues could benefit from? I'm too old to change my ways at this point anyway, so you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But maybe some of my junior colleagues could benefit from any observations that you've made about lessons learned in terms of doing research. And those could be lessons learned the hard way through your own challenges, or maybe lessons that you've learned by observing others or whatever.
So my sister shared this with me. So she was talking to my son about some kind of surgery, and apparently it's some kind of hand surgery. He's a hand surgeon, and he advocates doing it one way, and the norm is for people to do it another way. And he said to my sister, but it's really hard to tell people they're wrong. He said, but my mom seems to have made a career of it.
Right. By the way, I should mention to everybody, so Anne-Marie's son is a doctor. And so he knows what he's talking about, I presume.
Well, and he does academic medicine, right? So
yes.
But it's fun. It's periodically I get to help him with stats, but that's about it. Yeah, so first, it's not really, the problem is, I told you up front that when I identify paper opportunities by disconnects, right? And by very nature, disconnects are going to mean somebody's wrong, at least at some level. Either they're missing something or, so it's hard to get things published when you're showing somebody that they're wrong, because who's it going to go to for review?
Right, exactly.
So I don't know, so I would say, do as I say, not as I do.
So how do you handle that pushback? I mean, obviously you've managed to, you haven't let it stop you, and maybe it slowed you down a little bit, but obviously you've built up a great career and, a great research performance record. So, clearly you've been able somehow to push through the pushback that you've gotten. Tell us a little bit about what you've learned about how to do that.
Oh, I haven't do it. I often at an academy do a session, is it academy or SMS, or on a panel where they, give advice to junior faculty and stuff. One thing people don't realize, so one thing is you can push back with the editor, right? It's a lot easier to do that if you have a senior co-author. So I would strongly encourage junior faculty to have senior co-authors, right?
Okay.
You just continue the apprenticeship process that you had as a PhD student, right? Because the advantage of having a senior co-author is, one, they know how to get paper, they know how to write papers. Two, we have to admit this, Rich, you get the benefit of the doubt in the review process for the most part, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
guess so.
Right? They'll give you the better reviewers and all that. So you get that benefit. And three, they're more likely to get invited to give talks. And when they give the talk, they'll be giving your paper. So they'll be talking, which is important for the letter writers.
Right.
Okay, so that would be one piece of advice. But I think I had another, maybe it'll come back to me if you.
Okay. So you've learned a way to tell people that they're wrong, as your son says, and get away with it.
I don't know. I don't get it. These papers are not cited, as you know, they're not very highly cited. So yeah. But no, I know what I was going to say. This is a fabulous career, right? I mean, it doesn't matter.
I like it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me in some sense whether I get cited or not. I mean, I get paid to identify problems I think are fundamentally interesting and to dig into them and try to solve them. It's just fabulous.
As I tell people, it beats working for a living.
No, it's working. I used to, this will get back to my son again, but my mantra used to be, I only work 2 days a week, 4 months a year. And he goes, I'm so sick of hearing that. And he says, it's absolutely not true. He goes, you work far more now than you did when you were at Hughes. And I, as you can imagine, was working pretty hard at Hughes as well. Right.
Yeah, that's true. I know it's true. There's never a time when I'm leaving my work behind. It's always there with me. It's always right there on my shoulder, whispering in my ear. Usually whispering insults.
Don't do that.
So, yeah, okay, well, that's good. So if you were starting it all over as a new doctoral student today, is there anything you would do differently? No, okay.
No. UCLA was a tough place just because nobody was writing at the time. So we didn't learn the craft, but they were just really smart people. If you work with really smart people, ultimately you can kind of figure it out.
Okay. And I noticed that, of course, you've mentored a lot of, really successful people in the field. Brian Wu, Hart Posen, Ishan Guler, Christina Fang.
Christina and Ishan, I was on their committee, but I wasn't.
Well, but you played a role in helping them along, right?
Yeah, I love students.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you work with doctoral students. I could learn from this.
Well, it starts when you have the so I wasn't teaching PhDs at Wharton, but I'll tell a fun story, I guess. I might have saved this for the students, but when I was at Wharton, there were more faculty than PhD students, and so the students got to pick what faculty they want to work with, which in essence that happens anyway. But Hart Posen kept coming back to me, and we had like 3 meetings. And then at the end of the 3rd meeting, he said, well, I decided I wanted to work with you. And I go, well, the most exciting thing about that is that this whole speed dating thing is over. Yeah. But no, so that was, it's easiest when you teach the seminar, because what you do in the seminar each week is you assign, you do a bunch of readings, and my assignment is typically identify some question that, surfaces from the reading, something that doesn't make sense, right? Mm-hmm. And ultimately one of those typically turns into a paper, and that's how I end up working with the student. Right. So yeah, I have a really exciting one. She's actually, I think officially she's a dance student, but it grew out of my class. Ming Wang is redoing the Remelt 19, how much does industry matter paper.
Okay.
Yeah, because people, that's the one I'm talking about, right? Everybody was upset about the corporate effect, right? So his thing was showing that, basically that quarter was wrong, or that, right?
Yes.
Okay. That industry doesn't matter that much. That's what he cared about. In much more action within industry than there is across industry. But people took the result that corporate was insignificant, personally, the corporate strategy people. And later results end up saying that there is a significant corporate effect, and so Ming's paper is looking to see whether that is that because people, somebody was doing the methods wrong or what. And her basic story is no, it's changing over time, that there was no significant corporate effect back at the time that Remelt did his paper, because that was when the antitrust regime precluded you from being in related businesses. Mm-hmm.
Hey, that's a plausible explanation. I could buy that. The thing that occurs to me always about the small corporate effect in variance decomposition is that way of measuring the corporate effect is based on a presumption of a specific way that the corporation should influence performance, which is to raise all, rising tide, raising all boats, right? When, what we teach in our MBA classes is that, you have to make, at the corporate level, there are trade-offs to be made, right? You cannot get the maximum value out of a full portfolio of businesses by simply having each of them maximizing their own individual performance. In order to create synergies, some business unit has to make sacrifices for the greater good of the whole, right? That's the whole purpose of, that's what our theory says. And that's not going to be captured in the rising tide lifting all boats, right? Yeah. It's going to be lowering some boats for the sake of really dramatically rising others, right? Yeah. So if you find a corporate effect with, measuring it in that way, then you're actually, the true corporate effect is going to be larger. Yeah, right. So I think that's part of why, the quote unquote measured corporate effect is so low, is because people are doing, companies are doing what they should be doing, which is sub-optimizing the performance of some business units in order to, dramatically increase the performance of others, which is not going to be, and especially if you put equal weighting on all the business units, is not going to show up in that way of measuring it through variance decomposition. So we do want to give you a chance to move on to the presentation, but I did want to conclude with one last question, which is, given that you've worked with so many interesting and successful doctoral students, what's the most important piece of advice that you give your own doctoral students?
Well, there's heterogeneity across students. I don't know. I'll think about that when I get to meet with the students later. Maybe I'll
okay, fair enough. You can think about what are the contingency factors that might need lead you to give different pieces of advice to different students.
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody please join me in thanking Anne-Marie for putting up with our odd, celebrity talk show ritual. We really appreciate it, and I think the students above everybody else benefit greatly from this.
Oh, this was
Thank you.
fabulous. I appreciate it. Great questions.
Thanks.